Maybe I do.
Just hear soft clicking.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, buddy. So we're live here.
So Cassidy Hutchinson, who's going to be testifying, she is the witness who the last time we gathered for this little thing named several Congress people as asking for pardons. She was a special assistant to Mark Meadows, and from what I read today, he did not have meetings without her present at them.
On the United States
she has
Capitol
been
will
in
be in order.
every meeting.
Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess.
Sound good on your end?
Point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10, the chair announces the committee's approval to release the deposition material presented during this hearing. Good afternoon. In our hearings over the previous weeks, the Select Committee has laid out the details of a multi-part pressure campaign driven by the former president aimed at overturning the results of the 2020 presidential election and blocking the transfer of power. We've shown that this effort was based on a lie that the election was stolen, tainted by widespread fraud, Donald Trump's big lie. In the weeks ahead, the committee will hold additional hearings about how Donald Trump summoned a mob of his supporters to Washington, spurred them to march on the Capitol, and failed to take meaningful action to quell the violence as it was unfolding on January 6th. However, in recent days, the Select Committee has obtained new information dealing with what was going on in the White House on January 6th and in the days prior. Specific detailed information about what the former president and his top aides were doing and saying in those critical hours. First-hand details of what transpired in the office of the White House Chief of Staff, just steps from the Oval Office as the threats of violence became clear, and indeed, violence ultimately descended on the Capitol in the attack on American democracy. It's important that the American people hear that information immediately. That's why, in consultation with the Vice Chair, I've recalled the committee for today's hearing.
Big stuff.
As you've seen and heard in our earlier hearings, the Select Committee has developed a massive body of evidence thanks to the many hundreds of witnesses who have voluntarily provided information relevant to our investigation. It hasn't always been easy to get that information because the same people who drove the former president's pressure campaign to overturn the election are now trying to cover up the truth about January 6th. But thanks to the courage of certain individuals, the truth won't be buried. The American people won't be left in the dark. Our witness today, Ms. Cassidy Hutchinson, has embodied that courage. I won't get into a lot of detail about Ms. Hutchinson's testimony will show. I'll allow her words to speak for themselves, and I hope everyone at home will listen very closely. First, I'll recognize our distinguished Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, for any opening statements she'd care to offer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In our first 5 hearings, the committee has heard from a significant number of Republicans, including former Trump administration Justice Department officials, Trump campaign officials, several members of President Trump's White House staff, a prominent conservative judge, and several others. Today's witness, Ms. Cassidy Hutchinson, is another Republican and another former member of President Trump's White House staff. Certain of us in the House of Representatives recall that Ms. Hutchinson once worked for House Republican Whip Steve Scalise, but she is also a familiar face on Capitol Hill because she held a prominent role in the White House Legislative Affairs Office, and later was the principal aide to President Trump's Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. Ms. Hutchinson has spent considerable time up here on Capitol Hill representing the Trump administration, and we welcome her back. Up until now, our hearings have each been organized to address specific elements of President Trump's plan to overturn the 2020 election. Today, we are departing somewhat from that model, because Ms. Hutchinson's testimony touches on several important and cross-cutting topics that are relevant to each of our future hearings. In her role working for the White House Chief of Staff, Ms. Hutchinson handled a vast number of sensitive issues. She worked in the West Wing, several steps down the hall from the Oval Office. Ms. Hutchinson spoke daily with members of Congress, with high-ranking officials in the administration, with senior White House staff, including Mr. Meadows, with White House counsel, lawyers, and with Mr. Tony Ornato, who served as the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. She also worked on a daily basis with members of the Secret Service who were posted in the White House. In short, Ms. Hutchinson was in a position to know a great deal about the happenings in the Trump White House. Ms. Hutchinson has already sat for 4 videotaped interviews with committee investigators, and we thank her very much for her cooperation and for her courage. We will cover certain, but not all, relevant topics within Ms. Hutchinson's knowledge today. Again, our future hearings will supply greater detail, putting the testimony today in a broader and more complete context. Today, you will hear Ms. Hutchinson relate certain firsthand observations of President Trump's conduct on January 6th. You will also hear new information regarding the actions and statements of Mr. Trump's senior advisors that day, including his Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, and his White House counsel. And we will begin to examine evidence bearing on what President Trump and members of the White House staff knew about the prospect for violence on January 6th, even before that violence began. To best communicate the information the committee has gathered, we will follow the practice of our recent hearings, playing videotape testimony from Ms. Hutchinson and others, and also posing questions to Ms. Hutchinson live. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Our witness today is Ms. Cassie Hutchinson, who served in the Trump administration in the White House Office of Legislative Affairs from 2019 to 2020, and as a special assistant to the president in the White House Chief of Staff's office from March 2020 through January 2021. I will now swear in our witness. The witness will please stand and raise her right hand.
Just don't want to wait. You want to speculate. I think she heard some things being said, and she's been pressured to not share her views.
The whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Also, I'd like to notice every time they do this, this is an official hearing before Congress with the legal requirements that there are to tell the truth, as opposed to any other statements that someone makes in the media.
Perjury.
I now recognize myself for questions. Ms. Hutchinson, I'd like to start with a few questions about your background. These are some photographs we've obtained highlighting your career. These show you with members of Congress, including Steve Scalise, as well as the White House with leader Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan. Others show you with the President and members of Congress aboard Air Force One. Before you worked in the White House, you worked on Capitol Hill for Representative Steve Scalise, the Republican
I'm not
whip,
sure she looks nervous,
and Senator
Jim. I
Ted
think she
Cruz.
looks ticked off about something.
And then
She
in
looks angry to
2019,
me.
you moved to the White House and served there
Resolute.
until the end of the Trump administration in 2020.
But you might be right.
When you started at the White House, you served in the Office of Legislative Affairs. We understand that you were initially hired as a staff assistant, but were soon promoted to a position of greater responsibility. Can you explain your role for the committee?
When I moved over to the White House Chief of Staff's office with Mr. Meadows when he became the 4th Chief of Staff, it's difficult to describe a typical day. I was a special assistant to the President and an advisor to the Chief of Staff.
Wow.
The days depended on what the President was doing that day, and that's kind of how my portfolio was reflected. I had a lot of
LinkedIn is
outreach
better
with
than my
members of
LinkedIn.
Congress, senior cabinet officials. I would work on policy issues with relevant internal components and members on the Hill, as well as security protocol at the White House complex for Mr. Meadows and the President.
And then you received another promotion in March 2020. At that time, you became the principal aide to the new White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
What did a typical day look like for you in your work with Mr. Meadows?
It varied with what was going on. We spent a lot of time on the Hill. I spent time on the Hill independently too, as I was his liaison for Capitol Hill. We did a lot of presidential travel engagements, but mostly I was there to serve what the Chief of Staff needed, and a lot of times what the Chief of Staff needed was a reflection of what the President's schedule is detailed to do that day.
So is it fair to say that you spoke regularly in your position, both with members of Congress and with senior members of the Trump administration?
That's correct. That's a fair assessment, sir.
And would you say that in your work with Mr. Meadows, you are typically in contact with him and others in the White House throughout the day?
That's correct, sir. Mr. Meadows and I were in contact almost pretty much throughout every day, consistely.
Although
like
so
you and me,
much
Doug.
of grave importance happens in the West Wing of the White House, it's quite a small building. Above me on the screen, you can see a map of the first floor of the West Wing of the White House. On the right, you can see the President's Oval Office. On the left, the Chief of Staff's office suite. Within the Chief of Staff's office suite is a hall which was between the Vice President's office, Kirshner's office, and the Oval Office. Ms. Hutchinson, is this an accurate picture?
It's accurate. It's a lot smaller than it looks.
Absolutely. Ms. Hutchinson, this is a photo that shows the short distance between your office, Oval Office, and it only takes 5 to 10 seconds or so to walk down the hall from your office to the Oval Office. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. Pursuant to the Section 5C8
interesting
of House
line of
Resolution
what they're setting up.
503.
Yeah, they're setting
the
up
chair
that she could hear
recognizes
them.
the gentlewoman from Wyoming,
In other
Ms.
words.
Cheney, for questions.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we will begin today with an exchange that first provided Ms. Hutchinson a tangible sense of the ongoing planning for the events of January 6th. On January 2nd, 4 days before the attack on our Capitol, President Trump's lead lawyer, Mr. Giuliani, was meeting with White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and others. Ms. Hutchinson, do you remember Mr. Giuliani meeting with Mr. Meadows on January 2nd, 2021?
I do. He met with Mr. Meadows in the evening of January 2nd, 2021.
And we understand that you walked Mr. Giuliani out of the White House that night, and he talked to you about January 6th, what you remember him saying.
As Mr. Giuliani and I were walking to his vehicles that evening, he looked at me and said something to the effect of, "Cass, are you excited for the 6th? It's going to be a great day." I remember looking at him and saying, "Rudy, could you explain what's happening on the 6th? He had responded something to the effect of, "We're going to the Capitol. It's going to be great. The president's going to be there. He's going to look powerful. He's going to be with the members. He's going to be with the senators. Talk to the chief about it. Talk to the chief about it. He knows about it."
And did you go back then up to the West Wing and tell Mr. Meadows about your conversation with Mr. Giuliani?
I did. After Mr. Giuliani had left the campus that evening, I went back up to our office, and I found Mr. Meadows in his office on the couch. He was scrolling through his phone. I remember leaning against the doorway and saying, "I just had an interesting conversation with Rudy, Mark. Sounds like we're going to go to the Capitol." He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, "There's a lot going on, Cass, but I don't know. Things might get real, real bad on January 6th.
Ms. Hutchinson, Mr. Meadows is engaged in litigation with the committee to try to avoid testifying here. What was your reaction when he said to you things might get real, real bad?
In the days before January 2nd, I was apprehensive about the 6th. I had heard general plans for a rally. I had heard tentative movements to potentially go to the Capitol. But when hearing Rudy's take on January 6th and then Mark's response, that evening was the first moment that I remember feeling scared and nervous for what could happen on January 6th. And I had a deeper concern for what was happening.
Sorry about that. We got it. Sorry. I hope it goes back.
Discussion. I want to talk about a conversation that you had with Mr. John Ratcliffe, the Director of National Intelligence, and you had this conversation in December of 2020. Mr. Ratcliffe was nominated by President Trump to oversee U.S. intelligence, our U.S. intelligence community, and before his appointment, Mr. Ratcliffe was a Republican member of Congress. As you will see on this clip, Director Ratcliffe's comments in December of 2020 were prescient.
My understanding was Director Ratcliffe didn't want much to do
I don't know what the
with the
glitching
post-election
is.
period. Director Ratcliffe felt that it wasn't something that the White House should be pursuing. It felt it was dangerous for their privacy. He had expressed to me that he was concerned that it could spiral out of control and potentially be dangerous, either for our democracy or the way that things were going by the 6th.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
I'm like hanging on every word. I know we've got
Trying to fight the
video
results
issues,
of
but the
election,
audio coming through. Wow.
finding missing ballots, pressuring filing lawsuits in certain states where there didn't seem to be significant evidence, and reaching out to state legislatures about that. So pretty much the way that the White House is handling the post-election period, he felt that there could be dangerous repercussions in terms of precedent set for elections, for our democracy, for the 6th. You know, he was hoping that we would concede.
Well, I feel
So,
like
Ms.
we need to get
Hutchinson,
Ratcliffe.
now we're going to turn to certain information available before January 4th and what the Trump administration and the president knew about the potential for violence before January 6th. On the screen, you will see an email received by Acting Deputy Attorney General Donahue on January 4th from the National Security Division of the Department of Justice. Mr. Donahue testified in our hearings last week. The email identifies apparent planning by those coming to Washington on January 6th to, quote, occupy federal buildings, and discussions of, quote, invading the Capitol building. Here's what Mr. Donahue said to us.
And we knew that if you have tens of thousands of very upset people showing up in Washington, D.C., that there was no plan.
The U.S. Secret Service was looking at similar information and watching the planned demonstrations. In fact, their intelligence division sent several emails to White House personnel, like Deputy Staff Tony Ornato and the head of the President's Protective Detail, Robert Engel, including certain materials listing events like those on the screen. The White House continued to receive updates about planned demonstrations, including information regarding the Proud organizing and planning to attend events on January 6th. Although Ms. Hutchinson has no detailed knowledge of any planning involving the Proud Boys for January 6th, she did note this.
I recall hearing the word Oath Keeper and hearing the word Proud Boys closer to the planning of the January 6th rally when Mr. Giuliani would be around.
On January 3rd, the Capitol Police issued a special event assessment. In that document, the Capitol Police noted that the Proud Boys and other groups planned to be in Washington, D.C. on January 6th and indicated that, quote, unlike previous post-election protests, The targets of the pro-Trump supporters are not necessarily the counter-protesters as they were previously, but rather Congress itself is the target on the 6th.
Wow.
And led the riotous mob to invade and occupy our Capitol. Ms. Hutchinson, I want to play you a clip of one of our meetings when you described a call on January 4th you received from National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien on the same topic, potential violence on January 6th.
I received a call from
and led the riotous mob to invade and occupy our Capitol. Ms. Hutchinson, I want to play you a clip of one of our meetings when you described a call on January 5th that you received from National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien on the same topic, potential violence on January 6th.
I received a call from
and led the riotous mob to invade and occupy our Capitol.
I don't know why it keeps repeating itself.
Ms. Hutchinson, I want to play you a clip of one of our meetings when you described a call on January 4th that you received from National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien on the same topic, potential violence on January 6th.
Tell me about it.
I received a call from
and led the riotous mob to invade and occupy our Capitol. Ms. Hutchinson, I want to play you a clip of one of our meetings when you described a call on January 4th that you received from National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien on the same topic, potential violence on January 6th.
Fingers crossed we get an answer.
I received a call from Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor. He had asked if he could speak with Mr. Meadows about potential words of violence that he was hearing that were potentially going to happen on the Hill on January 6th.
Wow.
I had asked if he connected with Tony Ornato because Tony Ornato had a conversation with him, with Mark, about that topic. Robert had said, I'll talk to Tony, and then I don't know if Robert ever connected with Mark about the issue.
Ms. Hutchinson, can you describe for us Mr. Ornato's responsibilities as Deputy Chief of Staff?
The Deputy Chief of Staff position at the White House for operations is arguably one of the most important positions that somebody can hold. They're in charge of all security protocol for the campus and all presidential protectees, primarily the president and the first family, but anything that requires security for any individual that has presidential protection, so the Chief of Staff or the National Security Advisor, as well as the Vice President's team too. Tony would oversee all of that, and he was the conduit for security protocol between White House staff and the United States Secret Service.
Thank you. And you also described a brief meeting between Mr. Ornato and Mr. Meadows on the potential for violence. The meeting was on January 4th. They were talking about the potential for violence on January 6th. Let's listen to a clip of that testimony.
I remember Mr. Ornato had talked to him about intelligence reports. I just remember Mr. Ornato coming in and saying that we had intel reports saying that there could potentially be violence on the 6th.
Wow.
You also told us about reports of violence and weapons that the Secret Service were receiving on the night of January 5th and throughout the day on January 6th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
There are reports that police in Washington, D.C. had arrested several people with firearms or ammunition following a separate pro-Trump rally in Freedom Plaza on the evening of January 5th. Are those some of the reports that you recall hearing about?
They are.
Of course, the world now knows that the people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th had many different types of weapons. When a president speaks, the Secret Service typically requires those attending to pass through metal detectors, known as magnetometers, or MAGs for short. The Select Committee has learned that people who willingly entered the enclosed area for President Trump's speech were screened so they could attend the rally at the Ellipse. They had weapons and other items that were confiscated: pepper spray, knives, brass knuckles, tasers, body armor, gas masks, batons, blunt weapons. And those were just from the people who chose to go through the security for the president's event on the Ellipse, not the several thousand members of the crowd who refused to go through the MAGs and watched from the lawn near the Washington Monument.
I mean, I got the sort of the spirit in my
The
heart,
Select
but
Committee
that's
has
it.
learned about reports from outside the magnetometers and has obtained police radio transmissions identifying individuals with firearms, including AR-15s, near the ellipse on the morning of January 6th. Let's listen.
There's an individual who's in a tree. He's going to be a white male, about 6 feet tall,
Of course.
thin build, brown cowboy boots. He's got blue jeans and a blue jean jacket, and underneath the blue jean jacket, the complainant's both saw a stock with AR-15. He's going to be with a group of individuals, about five to eight other individuals. 2 of the individuals in that group at the base of the tree, near the porta potties, were wearing green fatigues, green olive drab style fatigues, about 5'8", 5'9", skinny white males, brown cowboy boots. They had Glock style pistols in their waistband.
8736 with the message that subject, weapon on his right hip. After that, he's in the tree.
Motor 1, make sure PPD knows they have an elevated threat in the tree.
These people have guns in trees, and no one's taking them out when the president's going to get on stage.
American flag face mask, cowboy boots, weapon on the right side hip.
We got 3 men walking down the street in fatigue while carrying AR-15. Copy at 14th and Independent.
AR-15s at 14th and Independence. As you saw in those emails, the first report that we showed, we now know was sent in the 8 o'clock hour on January 6th. This
Supreme
talked
Court
about
will
people
rule
in the
it's
crowd
totally
wearing ballistic
acceptable for them
helmets
to
and
be
body armor,
carrying
carrying
whatever
radio
weapons they want.
equipment and military-grade backpacks. The second report we showed you on the screen was sent by the Secret Service in the 11 a.m. hour, and it addressed reports of a man with a rifle near the ellipse. Ms. Hutchinson, in prior testimony, you described for us a meeting in the White House around 10 a.m. in the morning of January 6th, involving Chief of Staff Meadows and Tony Ornato. Were you in that meeting?
I was.
Let's listen to your testimony about that meeting, and then we'll have some questions.
I think the last time we talked, you mentioned that some of the weapons that people had at the rally included flagpoles, oversized sticks or flagpoles, bear spray. Is there anything else that you recall hearing about that the people who would gather on the ellipse had?
I recall Tony and I having a conversation with Mark probably around 10 a.m., 10:15 a.m., where I remember Tony mentioning knives, guns in the form of pistols and rifles, bear spray, body armor, spears, and flagpoles. Spears were one item, flagpoles were one item, and then Tony had relayed to me something to the effect of, and these effing people are fastening spears onto the ends of flagpoles.
Ms. Hutchinson, here's a clip of your testimony regarding Mr. Meadows' response to learning that the rally attendees were armed that day. What was Mark's reaction, Mr. Meadows' reaction to this list of weapons that people had in the crowd?
When Tony and I went in to talk to Mark that morning, Mark was sitting on his couch and on his phone, which was something typical. And I remember Tony just got right into it. I was like, sorry, I just want to let you know, and had informed him, like, this is how many people we have outside the mags right now. These are the weapons that we're known to have. It's possible he listed more weapons off that I just don't recall. And gave him a brief and concise explanation, but also fairly thorough. And I remember distinctly Mark not looking up from his phone. And I remember Tony finishing his explanation and it taking a few seconds for Mark to say something, to the point where I almost said, Mark, did you hear him? And then Mark chimed in and was like, all right, anything else? Still looking down at his phone. And Tony looked at me and I looked at Tony, and Tony said, no, sir, do you have any questions? He's like, what are you hearing? And then I looked at Tony and I was like, sir, he just told you about what was happening down at the rallies. And he was like, yeah, I know. And then he looked up and said, have you talked to the president? And Tony said, yes, sir, he's aware too. He said, all right, good.
He asked Tony if Tony had informed the president.
Yes.
And Tony said yes, he had. So, Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that Mr. Ornato told the president about weapons at the rally on the morning of January 6th?
That's what Mr. Ornato relayed to me.
And here's how you characterize Mr. Meadows' general response when people raised concerns about what could happen on January 6th.
So at the time, in the days leading up to the 6th, there were lots of public reports about how things might go bad on the 6th, and even the potential for violence. If I'm hearing you correctly, what stands out to you is that Mr. Meadows did not share those concerns, or at least did not act on those concerns?
Did not act on those concerns would be accurate.
But other people raised them to him? Like in this exchange, you mentioned that Mr. Ornato pulled him aside.
That's correct.
Ms. Hutchinson, we're going to show now an exchange of texts between you and Deputy Chief of Staff Ornato. And these text messages were exchanged while you were at the ellipse. In one text, you write, "But the crowd looks good from this vantage point as long as we get the shot. He was effing furious." And the text messages also stress that President Trump kept mentioning the OTR, an off-the-record movement. We're going to come back and ask you about that in a minute. But could you tell us, first of all, who it is in the text who was furious?
The he in that text that I was referring to was the president.
And why was he furious, Ms. Hutchinson?
He was furious because he wanted the arena that we had on the ellipse to be maxed out at capacity for all attendees. The advance team had relayed to him that the mags were free-flowing. Everybody who wanted to come in had already come in, but he still was angry about the extra space and wanted more people to come in.
And did you go to the rally in the presidential motorcade?
I was there, yes, in the motorcade.
And were you backstage with the president and other members of his staff and family?
I was.
And you told us, Ms. Hutchinson, about particular comments that you heard while you were in the tent area.
When we were in the offstage announce area tent behind the stage, he was very concerned about the shot, meaning the photograph that we would get, because the rally space wasn't full. One of the reasons, which I've previously stated, was because he wanted it to be full and for people to not feel excluded because they'd come far to watch him at the rally. And he felt the mags were at fault for not letting everybody in. But another leading reason, and likely the primary reason, is because he wanted it full and he was angry that we weren't letting people through the mags with weapons, what the Secret Service deems as weapons and our weapons. But when we were in the offstage announce tent, I was part of a conversation. I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I overheard the president say something to the effect of, you know, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Let the people in. Take the effing mags away.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
Just to be clear, Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that the
believable.
president wanted to take the mags away and said that the armed individuals were not there to hurt him?
That's a fair assessment.
The issue wasn't with the amount of space available in the official rally area only, but instead that people did not want to have to go through the mags. Let's listen to a portion of what you told us about that.
In this particular instance, it wasn't the capacity of our space, it was the mags and the people that didn't want to come through. And that's what Tony had been trying to relay to him that morning. You know, it's not the issues that we encountered on the campaign. We have enough space, sir. They don't want to come in right now. They have weapons that they don't want confiscated by the Secret Service, and they're fine on the mall. They can see you on the mall, and they want to march straight to the Capitol from the mall.
The president apparently wanted all attendees inside the official rally space and repeatedly said, quote, "They're not here to hurt me." And just to be clear, so he was told again in that conversation, or was he told again in that conversation that people couldn't come through the mags because they had weapons?
Correct.
and that people, his response was to say they can march to the Capitol from the ellipse.
Something to the effect of, take the effing mags away, they're not here to hurt me, let them in, let my people in, they can march to the Capitol after the rally's over, they can march from the ellipse, take the effing mags away, then they can march to the Capitol.
Ms. Hutchinson, what we saw when those clips were playing were photos provided by the National Archives showing the president in the offstage tent before his speech on the ellipse. You were in some of those photos as well. And I just want to confirm that that is when you heard the president say the people with weapons weren't there to hurt him and that he wanted the Secret Service to remove the magnetometers.
That's correct. In the photos that you displayed, we were standing towards the front of the tent with the TVs, really close to where he would walk out to go onto the stage. These conversations happened 2 to 3 minutes before he took the stage that morning.
Let's reflect on that for a moment. President Trump was aware that a number of the individuals in the crowd had weapons and were wearing body armor. And here's what President Trump instructed the crowd to do.
We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down.
No,
We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol.
And the crowd, as we know, did proceed to the Capitol. It soon became apparent to the Secret Service, including the Secret Service teams in the crowd, along with White House staff, that security at the Capitol would not be sufficient.
I've had 2 or 3 phone conversations with Mr. Ornato when we were at the ellipse, and then I had 4 men on Mr. Meadows' detail with me in between those individuals and then a few other bodies on the ground, just the Secret Service doing advance. They were getting notifications through their radios, and Mr. Ornato in one phone conversation had called me and said, make sure the chief knows that they're getting close to the Capitol. It's they're having trouble stacking bodies.
And Ms. Hutchinson, when you said they were having trouble stacking bodies, did you mean that law enforcement at the Capitol needed more people to defend the Capitol from the rioters?
It was becoming clear to us and to the Secret Service that Capitol police officers were getting overrun at the security barricades outside of the Capitol building, and they were short people to defend the building against the rioters.
And you mentioned that Mr. Ornato was conveying this to you because he wanted you to tell Mr. Meadows. So did you tell Mr. Meadows that people were getting closer to the Capitol and that Capitol Police was having difficulty?
After I had the conversation with Mr. Meadows, after I had the conversation with Mr. Ornato, I went to have the discussion with Mr. Meadows. He was in a secure vehicle at the time making a call. So when I had gone over to the car, I went to open the door to let him know, and he had immediately shut it. I don't know who he was speaking with. It wasn't something that he regularly did, especially when I would go over to give him information. So I was a bit taken aback, but I didn't think much of it, and thinking that I would be able to have the conversation with him a few moments later.
And were you able to have that conversation a few moments later?
Probably about 20 to 25 minutes later. There was another period in between where he shut the door again, and then when he finally got out of the vehicle, we had the conversation. But at that point, there was a backlog of information that he should have been made aware of.
And so you opened the door to the control car, and Mr. Meadows pulled it shut?
That's correct.
And he did that 2 times?
That's correct.
And when you finally were able to give Mr. Meadows the information about the violence at the Capitol, what was his reaction?
He almost had a lack of reaction. I remember him saying, all right, something to the effect of, how much longer does the president have left in his speech?
Again, much of this information about the potential for violence was known or learned before the onset of the violence, early enough for President Trump to take steps to prevent it. He could, for example, have urged the crowd at the ellipse not to march to the Capitol. He could have condemned the violence immediately once it began, or he could have taken multiple other steps. But as we will see today and in later hearings, President Trump had something else in mind. One other question at this point, Ms. Hutchinson. Were you aware of concerns that White House counsel Pat Cipollone or Eric Hirschman had about the language President Trump used in his ellipse speech?
There were many discussions the morning of the 6th about the rhetoric of the speech that day. In my conversations with Mr. Hirschman, he had relayed that we would be foolish to include language that had been included at the president's request, which had lines along to the effect of, fight for Trump, we're going to march to the Capitol, I'll be there with you, fight for me, fight for what we're doing, fight for the movement. Things about the vice president at the time, too. Both Mr. Hirschman and White House counsel's office were urging the speechwriters to not include that language for legal concerns and also for the optics of what it could portray the president wanting to do that day.
And we just heard the president say that he would be with his supporters as they marched to the Capitol. Even though he did not end up going, he certainly wanted to. Some have questioned whether President Trump genuinely planned to come here to the Capitol.
Yeah, I don't think for a moment that he ever wanted to. Trump is one of these guys that, like, he doesn't want to get in the fight himself.
Right, right.
You know, he's standing back, egging it on.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening. Yeah.
Who
Boy,
was Mark Meadows on the phone with?
Yeah.
In the control car.
And what was he
it
not?
Vladimir Putin?
And think about all the things that they didn't do. You know, they're just so blatant that they didn't do. It's just simply
and the reason he had
incredible.
No reaction is because the reason he had no reaction is because he knew it was going to take place, and he was resigned to it. You know, it's that, like, it's, you know, this picture of Mark Meadows, you know, sitting on the couch in his office, scrolling his phone,
had raised
just like meh.
The prospect of going up to the Capitol on January 6th.
Sorry for that
Mr.
delay.
Cipollone and I had a brief private conversation where he said to me, we need to make sure that this doesn't happen. This would be legally a terrible idea for us. We have serious legal concerns if we go up to the Capitol that day. And he then urged me to continue relaying that to Mr. Meadows, because it's my understanding that Mr. Cipollone thought that Mr. Meadows was indeed pushing this along with the president.
And we understand, Ms. Hutchinson, that you also spoke to Mr. Cipollone on the morning of the 6th as you were about to go to the rally on the ellipse. And Mr. Cipollone said something to you like, make sure the movement to the Capitol does not happen. Is that correct?
That's correct. I saw
putting the
Mr.
pressure on her.
Cipollone right before I walked out onto West Exec that morning, and Mr. Cipollone said something to the effect of, please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen.
So they knew it was coming.
Do you remember which crimes Mr. Cipollone was concerned with?
In the days leading up to the 6th, we had conversations about potentially obstructing justice or defrauding the electoral count.
Let's hear about some of those concerns that you mentioned earlier in one of your interviews with us.
Having a private conversation with Pat late in the afternoon of the 3rd or the 4th, that Pat was concerned it would look like we were obstructing justice or obstructing the electoral college count. And I apologize for probably not being very firm with my legal terms here, but that it would look like we were obstructing what was happening on Capitol Hill. And he was also worried that it would look like we were inciting a riot or encouraging a riot to erupt on the Capitol, at the Capitol.
All of which you did.
Yeah, because they knew there was going to
In
be
fact,
a riot.
in the days before January 6th and on January 6th itself, President Trump expressed to multiple White House aides that he wanted to go to the Capitol after his speech. Here's what various White House aides have told the committee about the president's desire to go to the Capitol.
Did the president tell you this, that he wanted to speak at the Capitol?
Correct, yes.
During the meeting in the dining room, did the idea of the president proceeding or walking to the Capitol on the 6th after his speech come up?
Walking to the Capitol? No.
Driving to the Capitol?
It came up.
Okay, how did it come up and what was discussed?
You brought it up. You said, I want to go down to the Capitol.
What about
Way to love
him
America,
marching to the
Max
Capitol on the
Weller.
6th?
Way to do it.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Trooper.
So it's kind of a general thing. I mean, to get into the specifics of it, I was aware of the desire of the president to potentially march to the or accompany the rally attendees to the Capitol.
When did you first hear about this idea of the president accompanying rally attendees to the Capitol on the 6th?
Well, this was at the 6th. This was during the after he finished his remarks.
Wow.
When the president said that he would be going to the Capitol during his speech on the ellipse, the Secret Service scrambled to find a way for him to go. We know this from witnesses and the Secret Service, also from messages among staff on the President's National Security Council. The NSC staff were monitoring the situation in real time, and you can see how the situation evolved in the following chat log that the committee has obtained.
Oh my gosh.
As you can see, NSC staff believed that Mogul, the president, was, quote, going to the Capitol, and, quote, they are finding the best route now. From these chats, we also know the staff learned of the attack on the Capitol in real time. When President Trump left the ellipse stage at 1:10, the staff knew that rioters had invaded the inaugural stage and Capitol Police were calling for all available officers to respond.
Incredible.
When Republican leader Kevin McCarthy heard the president say he was going to the Capitol, he called you, Ms. Hutchinson. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And in this text message, you told Tony Ornato, quote, McCarthy just called me too.
Types out his whole name.
And do you guys think you're coming to my office? Tell us about the call that day with Leader McCarthy during the president's speech on the ellipse.
I was still in the tent behind the stage, and when you're behind the stage, you can't really hear what's going on in front of you. So when Mr. McCarthy called me with this information, I answered the call and he sounded rushed, but also frustrated and angry at me, and I was confused because I didn't know what the president had just said. He then explained, the president just said he's marching to the Capitol. You told me this whole week you aren't coming up here. Why would you lie to me? I said, I'm not lying. I wasn't lying to you, sir. We're not going to the Capitol. And he said, well, he just said it on stage, Cassidy. Figure it out. Don't come up here. I said, I'll run the traps on this and I'll shoot you a text. I can assure you we're not coming up to
Like
the Capitol.
she's the key to
We've
it?
already made that decision.
29-year-old?
He pressed a little bit more, believing me, but I think frustrated that the president had said that. And we ended the phone conversation after that. I called Mr. Ornato to reconfirm that we weren't going to the Capitol, and which was also in our text messages. I sent Mr. McCarthy another text telling him the affirmative that we were not going up to the Capitol, and he didn't respond after that.
And
Not
we
even
understand,
Donald
Ms.
Trump's
Hutchinson,
staff
that the
believes what he
plans
says.
for the president to come up to the Capitol had included discussions at some point about what the president would do when he came up to the Capitol on January 6th. Let's look at a clip of one of your interviews discussing that issue with the committee.
When you were talking about a scheduled movement, did anyone say what the president wanted to do when he got here?
No. Not that I can specifically remember. I remember hearing a few different ideas discussed between Mark and Scott Perry, Mark and Rudy Giuliani. I don't know which conversations were elevated to the president. I don't know what he personally wanted to do when he went up to the Capitol that day. I know that there were discussions about him having another speech outside of the Capitol before going in. I know that there was a conversation about him going into the House chamber at one point.
Can you imagine?
As we've all just heard, in the days leading up to January 6th, on the day of the speech, both before and during and after the rally speech, President Trump was pushing his staff to arrange for him to come up here to the Capitol during the electoral vote count. Let's turn now to what happened in the president's vehicle when the Secret Service told him he would not be going to the Capitol after his speech.
I'm so glad
First,
so many people
here's the
tell
president's
us loser
motorcade
no.
leaving the ellipse after his speech
I mean,
on
loser
January
in the
6th.
technical sense.
One of the great joys of my life is seeing his helicopter leave Washington, D.C. on Inauguration Day.
Ms. Hutchinson, when you returned to the White House in the motorcade after the president's speech, where did you go?
When I returned to the White House, I walked upstairs towards the Chief of Staff's office, and I noticed Mr. Ornato lingering outside of the office. Once we had made eye contact, he quickly waved me to go into his office, which was just across the hall from mine. When I went in, he shut the door, and I noticed Bobby Engel, who is the head of Mr. Trump's security detail, sitting in a chair, just looking somewhat discombobulated and a little lost. I looked at Tony, and he had said, "Did you effing hear what happened in the Beast?" I said, "No, Tony, I just got back. What happened?" Tony proceeded to tell me that when the president got in the Beast, he was under the impression from Mr. Meadows that the off-the-record movement to the Capitol was still possible and likely to happen, but that Bobby had more information. So once the president had gotten into the vehicle with Bobby, he thought that they were going up to the Capitol, and when Bobby had relayed to him, "We're not, we don't have the assets to do it, it's not secure, we're going back to the West Wing," the president had a very angry response to that. Tony described him as being irate. The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel, and when Mr. Ornato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
And was
Who
Mr.
says towards his
Engel
clavicles,
in the
not
room as
neck?
Mr. Ornato told you this story?
He was.
Did Mr. Engel correct or disagree with any part of this story from Mr. Ornato?
Mr. Engel did not correct or disagree with any part of the story.
Did Mr. Engel or Mr. Ornato ever after that tell you that what Mr. Ornato had just said was untrue?
Neither Mr. Ornato nor Mr. Engel told me ever that it was untrue.
And despite this altercation, this physical altercation, during the ride back to the White House, President Trump still demanded to go to the Capitol. Here's what Kayleigh McEnany, the White House press secretary at the time, wrote in her personal notes and told the committee about President Trump's desire to go to the Capitol after returning to the White House.
Physically assaulted a
When
Secret
you wrote,
Service
POTUS
agent.
wanted to walk to the Capitol, was that based solely on what the president said during his speech or anything that he or anybody else said afterwards?
So to the best of my recollection, I believe when we got back to the White House,
he said he wanted to physically walk with the marchers, and according to my notes, he then said he'd be fine with just riding the beast. But to that's my recollection, he wanted to be a part of the march in some fashion.
Okay, and
What was
just
he
for the record, the
thinking?
beast refers to the presidential limousine.
Yes.
President Trump did not go to the Capitol that day. We understand that he blamed Mark Meadows for that.
So prior to leaving the rally site, when he got off the stage and everybody was making the movement back to the motorcade, I had overheard Mr. Meadows say to him then, as I had prior to Mr. Trump taking the stage that morning, that he was still working on getting an off-the-record movement to the Capitol. So when Mr. Trump took the stage, he was under the impression via Mr. Meadows that it was still possible. So when he got off the stage, I had relayed to Mr. Meadows that I had another conversation with Tony. The movement was still not possible. Mr. Meadows said, okay. And then as they proceeded to go to the motorcade, and Mr. Meadows had reiterated, we're going to work on it. So I talked to Bobby. Bobby has more information. Mark got into his vehicle.
That's leadership.
To my understanding, Trump got into the Beast. And after we had all arrived back at the White House, later in the day, it had been relayed to me via Mark that the president wasn't happy that Bobby didn't pull it off for him and that Mark didn't work hard enough to get the movement on the books.
The physical altercation that Ms. Hutchinson described in the presidential vehicle was not the first time that the president had become very angry about issues relating to the election. On December 1, 2020, Attorney General Barr said in an interview that the Department of Justice had not found evidence of widespread election fraud sufficient to change the outcome of the election. Ms. Hutchinson, how did the president react to hearing that news?
Around the time that I understand the AP article went live, I remember hearing noise coming from down the hallway, so I poked my head out of the office, and I saw the valet walking towards our office. He had said, get the chief down to the dining room, the president wants him. So Mark went down to the dining room and came back to the office a few minutes later. After Mark had returned, I left the office and went down to the dining room, and I noticed that the door was propped open and the valet was inside the dining room changing the tablecloth off of the dining room table. He motioned for me to come in and then pointed towards the front of the room near the fireplace mantle and the TV, where I first noticed there was ketchup dripping down the wall and there's a shattered porcelain plate on the floor. The valet had articulated that the president was extremely angry at the Attorney General's AP interview and had thrown his lunch against the wall.
These are the behaviors of a toddler.
Them to have to clean up, so I grabbed a towel and started wiping the ketchup off of the wall to help the valet out. And he said something to the effect of, he's really ticked off about this. I would stay clear of him for right now. He's really, really ticked off about this right now.
And Ms. Hutchinson, was this the only instance that you are aware of where the president threw dishes?
It's not.
And are there other instances in the dining room that you recall where he expressed his anger?
There were several times throughout my tenure with the Chief of Staff that I was aware of him either throwing dishes or flipping the tablecloth to let all the contents of the table go onto the floor and likely break or go everywhere.
And Ms. Hutchinson, Attorney General
He's doing it
Barr
right now.
described to the committee the president's angry reaction when he finally met with President Trump. Let's listen.
Unbelievably unfit.
And I said, look, I know that you're dissatisfied with me, and I'm glad to offer my resignation. And he pounded the table very hard. Everyone sort of jumped, and he said, accept it.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. The chair requests those in the hearing room to remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted our witness from the room. Pursuant to the order of the committee of today, the chair declares the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
All right. Unbelievable.
Completely believable.
I'll tell you what, this is just the most bonkers, unbelievably bonkers story that that we could be dealing with.
Okay,
It's
so
just
listen. If we had gotten news ahead of time.
Wow, applause. A smattering of applause. You know what?
Wow.
I'm going to give her the full Monty here. You know, I am loath to want to, cheer on a person who chose to work for the Trump administration in the middle of all this. And
Yeah.
But having said that, good for her telling us the truth.
She is tremendously credible witness.
And very poised and very, just really riveting.
Yeah. Listen, if someone said Donald Trump threw dishes, threw temper tantrums when he didn't get what he liked, when he wanted, when he tried to grab a steering wheel from the back seat to go where he wanted to go, and, assaulted a Secret Service agent who was trying to stop him from, his own destruction, you go, yeah, of course.
I would not. No. It's not. It's
This
not
is all
reasonable.
This is all within character.
It's not.
This
it's
is
not
who
even.
the man is.
Look, this is so. This behavior from anyone, let alone an executive, let alone from a professional, let alone from the president of the United States, is so absolutely outside the norm. It is with a level of credulity. I promise you, there will be millions of people who will not believe her testimony because it is insane to a degree that seems like it's just unbelievable that someone would do such a thing. That the Secret Service is telling you it's not safe, and you then grab the steering wheel, put your hands on the throat of the Secret Service agent to take over, to go do it anyway, is so
Clavicles.
unbelievably outside the scope of what a president of the United States would ever have been expected to do. You just, I'm telling you, there are millions of people who will just find this. And frankly, if someone's like, "Oh, I'm pretty sure the president does that stuff," like, what? You couldn't even make it up that the president
Vanessa,
would do.
My
The
wife is
president would do
walking
such a
through
thing.
here. Doug thinks that this is that people would say this is unbelievable behavior from the president of the United States. I think it's completely within character and total not a surprise. Vanessa said not a surprise.
Yeah.
Jim, Alex, Corey, Wendy, those of you that are watching along with us,
Yeah,
chime
look,
in.
look,
Are you surprised by this? This is
Rob,
totally
if you're not
in
okay,
character.
look.
I'm not saying
listen,
it's
not within.
acceptable.
It's not.
I'm not saying it's acceptable. I'm saying Donald Trump is who we always thought he was. He's a big baby who throws a fit when he doesn't get his way.
Look. I mean, obviously he did it. So it's not only your case is made that he did it, right? He behaved that way. That he did needs to shock for people to be like, "Oh yeah, no, I expected that. Pretty much expected it." No one expected that. No one's like, you know what I bet he does? I bet he grabs Secret Service agents. I bet he screams at people in the room and throws food and plates. Have you ever been in a space with anyone who has thrown food against a wall and broken plates? Everybody's like, nope, never been there.
But I've never had lunch with Donald Trump.
Come on. These are revelations, Rob. These are not like, oh, I guess people just know this is what the president. Sure, of course, this is what the guy. No, this is
what
like
people think this guy is like.
Hold on a minute. This over the top. This is a needle changer. That's what I'm getting at. I think people are going to run into this information and they are going to say, that changes things. Not, oh yeah, no, baked it in. Pretty sure the president was going to assault Secret Service agents. No, I already had that on my bingo card. I had to assault Secret Service agents to go to the Capitol. I had, throw food and shatter porcelain dishes in the White. No, I pretty much had that. Pretty much had that.
I love the little mention of ketchup. I love the little mention of ketchup because we know that he likes his steak well done with ketchup.
Well, steak. I think Alex said in the thing it was hamburgers and fries, which I can't. I'm no Donald Trump fan, but hamburgers and fries are pretty dang great, especially if you get that Impossible Burger from Burger King. I mean, it's just shockingly tasty. Look, this is
our use of the word clavicles instead of neck.
No,
can we talk about that? That was so weird.
Well, I guess you could say throat, but if he actually touched down here, because your neck is the back, right?
Okay, yeah.
So this area down here wouldn't be your throat. Her lawyer probably said, "Don't say throat. They'll bicker with throat. They will bicker with throat."
Area of his
Where did he glab? What do you call this? Where the look, when she even said we were going to one of the things we were afraid of was that we were going to be charged with defrauding the electoral count, and in her recorded testimony she said, "I'm sorry, I don't know the word for that." They coached her on what the word is for that so she could say it precisely because she's under testimony and you want to say things as accurately as possible. I bet someone said that's the clavicle area. That's like if you were putting together an assault charge, you wouldn't say neck or throat or chin. You would. So they're laying out something here very, very exacting with all the, drama around all this. But look, the takeaway here is that unknown before today was that Donald Trump was actually wanting to go. I mean, I had thought that loser was not wanting to go. He wasn't going to go. He knew all the time he wasn't going to go. Like, hey, see you there, suckers. Nope. He really did want to go. He really did want to walk into the Chamber of Congress, as opposed to the Chamber of Commerce, which would also just be a fine place for him to show up, see if he could, get some advertising for his crappy little steak shop that he was running in his failed casinos. I mean, honestly, who can't make money at a casino? Donald Trump. He wanted to go. He literally planned and then pressured people to go. This man. To go. And let's not miss this point of what she brought up. This guy said, let the people with guns get closer to me. They're not here to hurt me.
Right.
Normally, a person who wants protection would be like, let's not have the guys with guns get near all these other people. This guy says, let them walk to the Capitol from here. Not from those, so that they're in the same crowd. He said, send people with weapons while they knew. Now, whether he knew it or not, when he uttered those words, his team knew that the rioters had already breached the Capitol spaces. This is, all of those just stacking on top of each other into, it's like a Wordle, and there's, who caused the insurrection is the question, and there's 5 letters. I don't do Wordle, but you know what the answer is? Trump.
It's not heist, which was my my word this morning.
Yeah. Do you start now with Trump on all your Wordles just to give yourself
I don't.
I don't even Wordle, but I come up with Trump as a 5-letter answer to who caused the insurrection.
Wordle is great. What's even greater is that everyone stopped posting their Wordles on the interweb.
Yeah.
So this is, we have gotten bombshells today. Like this is big. This is really, really big.
Do you see Peggy Hayes? I'm going to put Peggy's comment in here, so it's going to pop up. So just prepare yourself because it's a pretty good one. Oh, hang on a second. I almost banned Peggy Hay instead of clicking.
Don't ban Peggy.
Sorry, Peggy.
Peggy says, the thing is, nothing Trump did was surprising, so I'm not shocked at his behavior. My neck got sore from shaking my head saying unbelievable. Yeah.
her neck got sore, not her clavicle.
Your clavicle.
I was
your clavicle area, Peggy.
multiple times I felt myself putting my hands to my clavicle here. Like this is the kind of behavior that if, let's say, human resources at any company found out about, the person's contract wouldn't be renewed. They might even lose their pension over these types of. I'm just checking over here to see if they're come back on over these types of behavior, because this is just so. It's so unpresidential and shows us what a risk this man was when he was president.
Absolutely.
Like, let's not bake into like, I don't know, he was a kind of a risk, but hey, gas prices.
The desperate lengths that he would go to try to grasp and hold on to the power. I mean,
literally
lunging to grab the steering wheel, and I mean, what an image! What a unbelievable, completely believable. What a totally shocking.
You can't get yourself to be
it is
like literally
both.
thinking here right now. I'm trying to imagine it, and it feels utterly Hollywood fantasyful.
Yes. This is what you get in like an Oliver Stone version of a presidential situation.
If Billy Ray, who's writing his show on Vote Common Gooder,
Billy Ray's got to like rewrite
yes,
like some of his episodes in light of this testimony.
Okay, so again to Cassidy Hutchinson, I don't want to be who's the singer that sings all night long? All night long.
Lionel Richie?
Lionel Richie. I don't want to be all Lionel Richie, but Cassidy Hutchinson, you're going to get applauses all night long if you want them. All, you're just fantastic. Way to go. And it's June 28th, 2022. This would have been helpful during the impeachment. Were you interviewed for the impeachment? Did you keep it quiet during the impeachment? Yep, kept it quiet during the impeachment.
Yeah,
you had to wait.
Keep it quiet to write a book.
This is 4 hearings in, and January 6th, because this isn't I feel like I have to say this every time I say Cassidy Hutchinson. This isn't Cassidy Hutchinson's fault. The committee had all this information in her recorded testimony.
Not the Trump assault stuff. That was live. That was not recorded.
No,
everything else was recorded.
Right. So you're suggesting that that she didn't, but she communicated in the recording the bit about going back and talking to Torrentino or Tarantino, the head of security. So anyway, they've known this. She was ready to tell this. The Secret Service agents knew this. This is the quiet that is kept that allows this stuff to go on. Right? The President of the United States, we've been asking all along. They asked it during the impeachment hearing and other times. What did you know and when did you know it? Well, they knew what they knew and when they knew it. And had this all been available for impeachment? Here's a question for you, Rob. New impeachment charges?
Do it.
Can you do it?
Them now.
Is it possible?
Impeach him now.
Can you have is it like a crime where you have a re-impeachment and you can't quite get there? Could this move some senators to say like, okay, we're putting an end to his ability to run for office again?
Committee's coming back.
Oh my Lance, thank you. Good eye.
That's an interesting
Captain.
that's an interesting legal remedy.
Could he be a 5-time impeached president? Could they just impeach him 2 more times? Wow, look at those. Look at them
Meeting
scatter.
will be in order. Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Vice Chair Cheney.
Oh,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
oh, you're Liz
Before
Cheney.
we turn to what Ms. Hutchinson
The host
saw and
recognized her,
heard
too.
in the White House during the violent attack on the Capitol on January 6th, let's discuss certain communications White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows had on January 5th. President Trump's associate, Roger Stone, attended rallies during the afternoon and the evening of January 5th in Washington, D.C.
Let's get him.
On January 5th and 6th, Mr. Stone was photographed with multiple members of the Oath Keepers who were allegedly serving as his security detail. As we now know, multiple members of that organization have been charged with or pled guilty to crimes associated with January 6th. Mr. Stone has invoked his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination before this committee. General Michael Flynn has also taken the fifth before this committee. Mr. Stone previously had been convicted of other federal crimes unrelated to January 6th. General Flynn had pleaded guilty to a felony charge also predating and unrelated to January 6th. President Trump pardoned General Flynn just weeks after the presidential election.
Criminals.
And in July of 2020, he commuted the sentence Roger Stone was to serve. The night before January 6th, President Trump instructed his Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, to contact both Roger Stone and Michael Flynn regarding what would play out the next day. Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that President Trump asked Mark Meadows to speak with Roger Stone and General Flynn on January 5th?
Wow.
That's correct. That is my understanding.
Wow.
And Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that Mr. Meadows called Mr. Stone on the 5th?
I'm under the impression that Mr. Meadows did complete both a call to Mr. Stone and General Flynn the evening of the 5th.
And do you know what they talked about that evening, Ms. Hutchinson?
I'm not sure.
Is it your understanding that Mr. Giuliani, Mr. Eastman, and others had set up what has been called, quote, a war room at the Willard Hotel on the night of the 5th?
I was aware of that the night of the 5th.
And do you know if Mr. Meadows ever intended to go to the Willard Hotel on the night of the 5th?
Mr. Meadows had a conversation with me where he wanted me to work with Secret Service on a movement from the White House to the Willard Hotel so he could attend the meeting or meetings with Mr. Giuliani and his associates in the war room.
And what was your view as to whether or not Mr. Meadows should go to the Willard that night?
I had made it clear to Mr. Meadows that I didn't believe it was a smart idea for him to go to the Willard Hotel that night. I wasn't sure everything that was going on at the Willard Hotel, although I knew enough about what Mr. Giuliani and his associates were pushing during this period. I didn't think that it was something appropriate for the White House Chief of Staff to attend or to consider involvement in. I made that clear to Mr. Meadows. Throughout the afternoon, he mentioned a few more times going up to the Willard Hotel that evening, and then eventually dropped the subject the night of the 5th and said that he would dial in instead.
So General Flynn has appeared before this committee, and when he appeared before our committee, he took the 5th. Let's briefly view a clip of General Mike Flynn taking the Fifth Amendment. General Flynn, do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified?
Do we have?
Yes.
All right, we're back. Congressman Cheney, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. General Flynn, do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified?
Is that, can I get a clarification? Is that a moral question or are you asking a legal question?
I'm asking both.
I said the 5th.
Do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified morally?
Take the 5th.
You believe the violence on January 6th was justified legally?
5th.
General Flynn, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America?
The 5th.
Let's move on now to January 6th and the conduct of Donald Trump and Mark Meadows during the attack on the Capitol. Ms. Hutchinson, I'd like now for us to listen to a description, your description of what transpired in the West Wing during the attack. For context, in this clip, you describe the time frame starting at about 2 p.m.
So I remember Mark being alone in his office for quite some time, and I know we've spoken about Ben Williamson going in at one point, and I don't personally remember Ben going in. I don't doubt that he had gone in, but I remember him being alone in his office for most of the afternoon, around 2 o'clock to 2:05. Around 2 o'clock to 2:05, we were watching the TV, and I could see that the rioters were getting closer and closer to the Capitol. Mark still hadn't popped out of his office or said anything about it. So that's when I went into his office. I saw that he was sitting on his couch, on his cell phone.
Of course.
Same as the morning where he was just kind of scrolling and typing. I said,
doom scrolling.
"Hey, are you watching the TV, Chief?" Because his TV was small, and you can see it, but I didn't know if he was really paying attention. I said, "Are you watching the TV, Chief?" And he was like, "Yeah." I said, "Well, the rioters are getting really close. Have you talked to the president?" He said, "No, he wants to be alone right now." Still looking at his phone. So I start to get frustrated because, I sort of felt like I was watching this is not a great comparison, but a bad car accident that was about to happen where you can't stop it, but you want to be able to do something. And I remember thinking in that moment, Mark needs to snap out of this, and I don't know how to snap him out of this, but he needs to care. And I just remember I blurted out, I said, "Mark, do you know where Jim's at right now?" And he looked up at me at that point and said, "Jim?" And I said, "Mark, he was on the floor a little while ago giving a floor speech. Did you listen?" He said, "Yeah, it was real good. Did you like it?" And I said, "Yeah. Do you know where he's at right now?" He said, "Well, no, I haven't heard from him." And I said, "You might want to check in with him, Mark." And I remember pointing at the TV and I said, "The rioters are getting close. They might get in." And he looked at me and said something to the effect of, "All right, I'll give him a call."
Not long after the rioters broke into the Capitol, you described what happened with White House counsel Pat Cipollone.
No more than a minute and a half later, I see Pat Cipollone barreling down the hallway towards our office and rushed right in, looked at me, said, "Is Mark in his office?" And I said, "Yes." He just looked at me and started shaking his head and went over, opened Mark's office door, stood there with the door propped open, and said something to Mark is still sitting on his phone. I remember glancing and he's still sitting on his phone. And I remember Pat saying to him something to the effect of, "The rioters have gotten to the Capitol, Mark. We need to go down and see the president now." And Mark looked up at him and said, "He doesn't want to do anything, Pat." And Pat said something to the effect of, and very clearly
Wow.
said this to Mark, something to the effect of, "Mark, something needs to be done or people are going to die and the blood's going to be on your effing hands. This is getting out of control. I'm going down there." And at that point, Mark stood up from his couch, both of his phones in his hand. He had his glasses on still. He walked out with Pat. He put both of his phones on my desk and said, "Let me know if Jim calls." And they walked out and went down
It's Jim
to
Jordan?
the dining room.
A few minutes later, Representative Jordan called back.
That's why he's not on the committee.
Remember, this is the guy that
A
couldn't
couple
remember
minutes later,
what
so
phone calls he
likely
had.
around
Yeah.
between 2:15 and 2:25. I know the tweet went out at 2:24. I don't remember if I was there when the tweet went out or if it happened right afterwards, but Jim had called. I answered the phone, said 1 second. He knew it was, I guess he knew it was me. I introduced myself, but I don't remember if he called my cell phone or if he had called one of Mark's. But I answered the phone and said, 1 sec, Mark's on the hall, I'm going to go hand the phone to him. He said, okay. So I went down, I asked the valet if Mark was in the dining room. Valet said yes. I opened the door to the dining room, briefly stepped in to get Mark's attention, showed him the phone, like flipped the phone his way so he could see it said Jim Jordan. He had stepped to where I was standing there holding the door open, took the phone talking to Jim with the door still propped open. So I took a few steps back. So I probably was 2 feet from Mark. He was standing in the doorway going to the Oval Office dining room. They had a brief conversation, and in the crossfires, I heard briefly like what they were talking about, but in the background, I had heard conversations in the Oval dining room at that point talking about the hang Mike Pence chants.
Wow.
That clip ended, Ms. Hutchinson, with you recalling that you heard the President, Mr. Meadows, and the White House counsel discussing the hang Mike Pence chants. And then you described for us what happened next.
It wasn't until Mark hung up the phone, handed it back to me. I went back to my desk. A couple minutes later, him and Pat came back, possibly Eric Hirschman too. I'm pretty sure Eric Hirschman was there. But I'm confident it was Pat that was there. I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. To which Pat said something, this is effing crazy. We need to be doing something more. Briefly stepped into Mark's office. And when Mark had said something to the effect of, he doesn't think they're doing anything wrong, knowing what I had heard briefly in the dining room, coupled with Pat discussing the hang Mike Pence chants in the lobby of our office, and then Mark's response, I understood there to be the rioters in the Capitol that were chanting for the vice president to be hung.
Let me pause here on this point.
Stunning.
Rioters chanted hang Mike Pence.
Stunning.
The President of the United States, Donald Trump, said that, quote, Mike deserves it, and that those rioters were not doing anything wrong. This is a sentiment that he has expressed at other times as well. In an interview with ABC News correspondent Jonathan Karl, President Trump was asked about the supporters chanting hang Mike Pence last year. Instead of condemning them, the former president defended them.
Saying hang Mike
Because
Pence.
it's common sense, John. It's common sense that you're supposed to protect. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right?
Yeah.
How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
President Trump's view that the rioters were not doing anything wrong and that, quote, Mike deserved it, helps us to understand why the president did not ask the rioters to leave the Capitol for multiple hours. In fact, he put this tweet out at 2:24 p.m. Ms. Hutchinson, do you recall seeing this tweet in which the president said the vice president did not have the courage?
Surprised you're not reading it into the record.
I do.
Ms. Hutchinson, what was your reaction when you saw this tweet?
As a staffer that worked to always represent the administration to the best of my ability and to showcase the good things that he had done for the country, I remember feeling frustrated, disappointed, and really, it felt personal. It was really sad. As an American, I was disgusted. it was unpatriotic, it was un-American. We were watching the Capitol building get defaced over a lie. And it was something that was really hard in that moment to digest, knowing what I had been hearing down the hall in the conversations that were happening, seeing that tweet come up and knowing what was happening on the Hill. And it's something that I still struggle to work through the emotions of that.
Ms. Hutchinson, we have also spoken to multiple other White House staff about their reaction to Donald Trump's 224 tweet, condemning Mike Pence for not having the courage to refuse to count electoral votes, an act that would have been illegal. Matthew Pottinger, a former Marine intelligence officer who served in the White House for 4 years, including as Deputy National Security Advisor, was in the vicinity of the Oval Office at various points throughout the day. When he saw that tweet, he immediately decided to resign his position. Let's watch him describe his reaction to the president's tweet.
Jeez, these guys could all go on YouTube Live and just have
One
said
of
all
my
this.
staff brought me a printout of a tweet by the president. And the tweet said something to the effect that Mike Pence, the vice president, didn't have the courage to do what should have been done. I read that tweet and made a decision at that moment to resign. That's where I knew that I was leaving that day, once I read that tweet.
Ultimately, members of the White House staff, Sarah Matthews, cabinet members Secretary Chao and Secretary DeVos resigned as well. Here is Secretary DeVos's resignation letter. As you can see, in resigning on January 6th, Secretary DeVos said to the president, quote, "There's no mistaking the impact your rhetoric had on the situation, and it is the inflection point for me." Let's also look at Secretary Chao's resignation statement.
Mitch McConnell's
Secretary
wife.
Chao resigned. She spoke of the January 6th attack, and she said, quote, "As I am sure is the case with many of you, this has deeply troubled me in a way I simply cannot set aside." Ms. Hutchinson, in our prior interviews, we've asked you about what the president's advisors were urging him to do during the attack. You've described roughly 3 different camps of thought inside the White House that day. Can you tell us about those?
There was a group of individuals that were strongly urging him to take immediate and swift action. I would classify the White House counsel's office, Mr. Hirschman, Ms. Ivanka Trump, in that category of really working to get him to take action and pleading with him to take action.
Interesting.
There was a more neutral group where advisors were trying to toe the line, knowing that Mr. Trump didn't necessarily want to take immediate action and condemn the riots, but knowing something needed to be done. And then there was the last group, which was deflect and blame. Let's blame Antifa. These aren't our people. It's my understanding that Mr. Meadows was in the deflect and blame category, but he did end up taking a more neutral route, knowing that there were several advisors in the president's circle urging him to take more action, which I think was reflected in the rhetoric released later that day in the videos.
Boy, question for her when she's on her podcast.
You told us that the White House counsel's office was in the camp encouraging the president to tell the rioters to stop the attack and to leave the Capitol. Let's listen.
White House counsel's office wanted there to be a strong statement out to condemn the rioters. I'm confident in that.
Now let's look at just one example of what some senior advisors to the president were urging. Ms. Hutchinson, could you look at the exhibit that we're showing on the screen now? Have you seen this note before?
That's a note that I wrote at the direction of the Chief of Staff on January 6th, likely around 3 o'clock.
And it's written on a Chief of Staff note card, but that's your handwriting, Ms. Hutchinson?
That's my handwriting.
And why did you write this note?
The Chief of Staff was in a meeting with Eric Hirschman and potentially Mr. Philbin, and they had rushed out of the office fairly quickly. Mark had handed me the note card with one of his pens and started dictating a statement for the president to potentially put out.
And, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. There were two phrases on there, one illegal and then one without proper authority. The illegal phrase was the one that Mr. Meadows had dictated to me. Mr. Hirschman had chimed in and said, also put without legal authority. There should have been a slash between the two phrases. It was an or if the president had opted to put one of those statements out. Evidently he didn't. Later that afternoon, Mark came back from the Oval Dining Room and put the palm card on my desk with illegally crossed out, but said we didn't need to take further action on that statement.
So, to your knowledge, this statement was never issued?
It was, to my knowledge, it was never issued.
And Ms. Hutchinson, did you understand that Ivanka Trump wanted her father to send people home?
That's my understanding, yes.
Let's play a clip of you.
Don't know what just happened.
This is totally worth the
Price of admission.
Oh, for sure.
Don't know what's happening. Apologies, everyone.
All this is showing us that Ivanka is
More
not
about this at our later
the
hearings.
most terrible
We have
person in the
evidence of many others
So sorry.
imploring Donald Trump and Mark Meadows to take action. Here is some of that evidence, text messages sent to Mark Meadows during the attack.
Sean Hannity.
This is a text message at 2:32 from Laura Ingram. Hey, Mark, the president needs to tell people in the Capitol to go home. In the next message, this is hurting all of us. And then he's destroying his legacy and playing into every stereotype. We lose all credibility against the BLM Antifa
Including the
crowd
stereotype
if
of
things
grabbing
go
Secret
south.
Service agents by the
The
clavicle.
president's son, Don Jr., also urgently contacted Mark Meadows. At 2:53, he wrote, he's got to condemn this shit ASAP. The Capitol Police tweet is not enough.
Donald Trump, Jr.
As you will see, these are just two of the numerous examples of Trump supporters and allies
Donald
urging
Trump
the president
Jr.,
to
voice of
tell his
reason.
supporters to leave the Capitol. Would not have been hard for the president to simply walk down to the briefing room a few feet down the hall from the Oval Office. As Nora O'Donnell noted during an interview with House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, where Leader McCarthy said he believed the attack was un-American.
I want to quickly bring in Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader. Leader McCarthy, do you condemn this violence?
I completely condemn the violence in the Capitol. What we're currently watching unfold is un-American. I am disappointed. I'm sad. This is not what our country should look like. This is not who we are. This is not the First Amendment. This has to stop, and this has to stop now.
Leader McCarthy, the President of the United States has a briefing room steps from the Oval Office. It is, the cameras are hot 24/7, as you know.
Wow.
Why hasn't he walked down and said that now?
I conveyed to the president what I think is best to do, and I'm hopeful the president will do it.
Republican House member Mike Gallagher also implored the president to call off the attack.
Mr. President, you have got to stop this. You are the only person who can call this off. Call it off. The election is over. Call it off. This is bigger than you. It's bigger than any member of Congress. It is about the United States of America, which is more important than any politician. Call it off. It's over.
Wonder what he
Despite the
says
fact
now.
that many people close to Donald Trump were urging him to send people home, he did not do so until later, much later. At 4:17 p.m., Donald Trump finally told the rioters to go home and that he loved them. Here's a portion of the video
Yeah, he
President
loved
Trump
them.
recorded from the White House.
We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
But as we will show in even greater detail in future hearings, Donald Trump was reluctant to put this message out, and he still could not bring himself to condemn the attack. Ms. Hutchinson has told us that too.
The one that he put out at 4:17.
I'm sure you've discussed it, and just to elaborate if I hadn't already at that point, I recall him being reluctant to film the video on the 6th. I was not involved in any of the logistics or the planning for that video. I just remember seeing the video go out and feeling a little shocked after it went out.
On the evening of January 6th and the day after, the president's family and his senior staff and others tried to encourage the president to condemn the violence and commit to the peaceful transition of power.
How'd that go?
At 3:31 p.m. on January 6th, Sean Hannity of Fox News texted Mark Meadows. Mr. Hannity said, quote, "Can he make a statement? I saw the tweet. Ask people to leave the Capitol." Later that evening, Mr. Hannity sent another text message to Mark Meadows. This time, he shared a link to a tweet. That tweet reported that President Trump's cabinet secretaries were considering invoking the 25th Amendment to remove President Trump from office. As you can see on the screen, the 25th Amendment to the Constitution creates a process for the transition of power if a president is unfit or unable to serve. The 25th Amendment has never been used to remove a president. But the committee has learned that after the attack on the U.S. Capitol, this was being discussed by members of President Trump's cabinet.
I hope they bring the
as a
cabinet
way of
members in and make
stripping
them
the
say
full
it.
power of the presidency from Donald Trump. President Trump's supporters were worried. In addition to the tweet that he sent Mark Meadows after the attack, Sean Hannity apparently spoke with President Trump and warned him about what could happen. We understand that this text message that Sean Hannity sent to Kayleigh McEnany on January 7th shows what Mr. Hannity said to the president. First, no more stolen election talk. Second, impeachment and 25th Amendment are real. Many people will quit. Ms. Hutchinson, you told us that you were hearing about discussions related to the 25th Amendment. Here's part of what you said.
What is that doing
Is
in
that
there?
Hunter Biden?
It's gotta be.
Mr. Pompeo reached out to have the conversation with Mr. Meadows in case he hadn't heard the discussions amongst cabinet secretaries.
Is that like
And from what I understand, it was more
a pardon
of a,
from Biden in exchange for them leaving, dropping
this is what
the
I'm
Hunter
hearing.
Biden story?
I want you to be aware of it, but I also think it's worth putting on your radar because you are the chief of staff. You're technically the boss of all the cabinet secretaries, and if conversations progress, you should be ready to take action on this. Like, I'm concerned for you and your positioning with this. Reach out to me if you have any questions or I can be helpful with you at all.
She's incredibly wise.
Inside the
person.
White House, the president's advisors, including members of his family, wanted him to deliver a speech to the country. Deputy White House counsel Pat Philbin prepared the first draft of what would be the president's remarks on national healing, delivered via pre-taped video on January 7th. When he arrived at the White House on the 7th, Mr. Philbin believed that more needed to be said, so he sat down and started writing. He shared the draft with Pat Cipollone, who also believed the president needed to say more. Mr. Cipollone agreed with the content, as did Eric Hirschman, who reviewed the draft. The committee has learned that the president did not agree with the substance as drafted and resisted giving a speech at all. Ms. Hutchinson, do you recall discussions about the president's speech on January 7th?
I do.
Let's listen, Ms. Hutchison, to what you told us about that and about the process of crafting those remarks.
I learned from a conversation with Mark and overhearing between him and White House counsel and Eric Hirschman as well that Trump didn't necessarily think he needed to do anything more on the 7th than what he had already done on the 6th. When he was convinced to put out a video on the 7th, I understand that he had a lot of opinions about what the context of that announcement were to entail. I had original drafts of the speech where there were several lines that didn't make it in there about prosecuting the rioters or calling them violent. He didn't want that in there. He wanted to put in there that he wanted to potentially pardon them. And this is just with the increased emphasis of his mindset at the time, which was he didn't think that they did anything wrong.
Right.
The people who did something wrong that day, or the person who did something wrong that day, was Mike Pence by not standing with him.
But the president's advisors urged him to give
It's just
the
bonkers.
speech.
Who convinced him to do the video on the 7th?
I'm not sure who convinced him or if it was a group of people that convinced him.
Who was in the group that you're aware of?
That I'm aware of: Mark, Ivanka, Jared Kushner, Eric Hirschman, Pat Cipollone, Pat Philbin. Those are the people that I'm aware of.
Do you know why that group of people thought it was necessary for him to release a statement?
I believe Kayleigh McEnany as well. From what I understood at the time, and from what the reports were coming in, there's a large concern of the 25th Amendment potentially being invoked, and there were concerns about what would happen in the Senate if the 25th was invoked. So the primary reason that I had heard, other than, we did not do enough on the 6th, we need to get a stronger message out there and condemn this, otherwise this will be your legacy. The secondary reason to that was, think about what might happen in the final 15 days of your presidency if we don't do this. There's already talks about invoking the 25th Amendment. You need this as cover.
The president ultimately delivered the remarks. Unlike many of his other speeches, he did not ad-lib much. He recited them without significant alteration, except one. Even then, on January 7th, 2021, the day after the attack on the U.S. Capitol, the president still could not bring himself to say, quote, "But this election is now over." One other point about the speech, Ms. Hutchinson.
Wow.
Did you hear that Mr. Trump at one point wanted to add language about pardoning those who took part in the January 6th riot?
I did hear that, and I understand that Mr. Meadows was encouraging that language as well.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you, and here's what you told us previously about that.
Mark Meadows, too.
Why
He said
is
he's
she
instructed
so
not to include it.
mad
Who
at
was
Mark Meadows?
instructing him not to include language?
She's telling the truth, man.
She's taking him
I
down.
understood from White House counsel's office coming into our office that morning that they didn't think that it was a good idea to include that in the speech.
That being Pat Cipollone?
That's correct. And Eric Hirschman.
Ms. Hutchinson, did Rudy Giuliani ever suggest that he was interested in receiving a presidential pardon related to January 6th?
Yes.
He did.
Ms. Hutchinson, did White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows ever indicate that he was interested in receiving a presidential pardon related to January 6th?
Mr. Meadows did seek that pardon. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I want to thank our witness for joining us today. The members of the Select Committee may have additional questions for today's witness, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objections, members will be permitted 10 business days to submit statements for the record, including opening remarks and additional questions
That
for the witness.
was a bombshell.
Without objection, the chair recognizes the vice chair for a closing statement.
Oh, hang on, closing statements.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by thanking Ms. Hutchinson for her testimony today. We are all in her debt. Our nation is preserved by those who abide by their oaths to our Constitution. Our nation is preserved by those who know the fundamental difference between right and wrong. And I want all Americans to know that what Ms. Hutchinson has done today is not easy. The easy course is to hide from the spotlight, to refuse to come forward, to attempt to downplay or deny what happened. That brings me to a different topic. While our committee has seen many witnesses, including many Republicans, testify fully and forthrightly, this has not been true of every witness. And we have received evidence of one particular practice that raises significant concern. Our committee commonly asks witnesses connected to Mr. Trump's administration or campaign whether they've been contacted by any of their former colleagues or anyone else who attempted to influence or impact their testimony. Without identifying any of the individuals involved, let me show you a couple of samples of answers we received to this question. First, here's how one witness described phone calls from people interested in that witness's testimony. Quote, "What they said to me is as long as I continue to be a team player, they know I'm on the right team. I'm doing the right thing. I'm protecting who I need to protect. You know I'll continue to stay in good graces in Trump world." And they have reminded me a couple of times that Trump does read transcripts, and just keep that in mind as I proceed through my interviews with the committee. Here's another sample in a different context. This is a call received by one of our witnesses.
Wow.
Quote, "A person let me know you have your deposition tomorrow. He wants me to let you know he's thinking about you. He knows you're loyal and you're going to do the right thing when you go in for your deposition."
They are
I
tampering
think most
with
Americans
witnesses.
know that attempting to influence witnesses to testify untruthfully presents very serious concerns. We will be discussing these issues as a committee, carefully considering our next steps. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
They don't have a lot of power.
Gentlewoman yields back.
Justice Department does.
Ms. Hutchinson, thank you. Thank you for doing your patriotic duty and helping the American people get a complete understanding of January 6th and its causes. Thank you for your courage in testifying here today. You have the gratitude of this committee and your country. I know it wasn't easy to sit here today and answer these questions, but after hearing your testimony in all its candor and detail, I want to speak directly to the handful of witnesses who have been outliers in our investigation, the small number who have defied us outright, those whose memories have failed them again and again on the most important details, and to those who fear Donald Trump and his enablers. Because of this courageous woman and others like her, your attempt to hide the truth from the American people will fail. And to that group of witnesses, if you've heard this testimony today and suddenly you remember things you couldn't previously recall, or there are some details you'd like to clarify, or you discovered some
the president
courage
grabbed
you had
me by the
hidden away
clavicle?
somewhere,
I
our
had
doors
totally
remain
I
open.
kind of remember that now.
The Select Committee will reconvene
There
in
was
the
a
weeks
plate
ahead
with some ketchup
as
on
we
it.
continue to lay out our findings to the American people.
Now that you forget, I mean, it just, a
The
lot
chair
of things were going
requests
on.
those in the
Packing,
hearing room to
was-
remain seated
All right.
until the Capitol Police have escorted the
This
witness
is
and
just all
members from the
all the
room.
same. Let's see if there's applause again.
Without
for,
objection,
Yeah.
the committee stands adjourned.
Let's hear it. I'm going to fake it with my button. I got a button right here, people. Anything? What becomes of Cassidy Hutchinson in life? Like, what does she go off to do?
Well, I mean,
life, work-wise, the rest of it.
She could have I think she's going to be a co-host on The View.
That's awesome.
She's
fantastic. Didn't see that
She's
coming.
fantastic.
Didn't see co-host.
It's
on The
totally
View.
probable, though, right? Like,
She is dynamic. She's got a great spirit about her.
It is as believable as it is to believe that Donald Trump would throw dishes. Wow. Okay, so
Write a book. Yeah, hope she doesn't write a book.
yeah, nobody reads books.
Just not
I've
ours.
writ-
They do
I've
read
written
books.
two that no one's read.
Yeah. I don't have enough hands to say I've written books and people don't read them. People watching right now have never read them.
Yeah.
I mean, people who will
Listen,
tolerate 2 hours of nonsense chit chat during the most important hearing of of our country.
Going on Amazon to support these guys a little bit with
Hey,
nothing.
so hopefully she doesn't fall down that well.
Yeah. Unless she gets a big advance, then I'm all for it. Have you ever gotten a big advance on a book, Doug?
The question about how big is one that comes up when you're talking about advances in books.
Yeah.
All right, so let's.
Alex read one of your books, Doug.
Really, Alex? Alex. Oh, Alex, thank you. I am not going to bring up, you've got, 10 more to go. That one is enough. One is plenty. It's like, you don't have to eat the whole baker's dozen. You just have one. Just enjoy a little nibble. I'm going to guess Outdoing Jesus is the book I'm going to guess. All right. We all got to run here, I know. But look, I think there was a lot here.
Yeah.
Now your question comes to my mind earlier, which is why today? What's going on with Cassidy Hutchinson that made her that she wasn't just scheduled? They had all of her testimony. They had all these things. What happened? So the cynical side, if they don't get out in front of this and say why, is people are going to be like, oh, they were losing the country. They were losing it to Roe versus Wade. They thought that the Supreme Court rulings were now stealing the thunder. They wanted to get back into the headlines. So what was it that made this not a scheduled hearing? When was Cassidy Hutchinson slotted to come in and tell her story? That's a big question.
I mean, I believe, and I think I've said this to you, Doug. I'm not sure if I've said it on these recordings. I believe that Donald Trump is going to announce that he is running for president in 2024 sometime before the committee hearings are over. I believe that he's going to do that so that any conclusions that come from the committee hearings can be painted as, they're going to paint him anyways, but very specifically as a partisan attempt to keep him from winning the presidency again. I think that there's this 2-week window that the committee was going to adjourn and come back, and who knows, maybe somebody got word that.
And you think they want to preempt to that? Is what you're saying? Like they wanted to? They think this could stop him from running?
Maybe Cassie got word because she's in this world, like she is in this world. Maybe she got word that something was imminent and said, "Hey, I got to talk now. I got to get this out now." And maybe I got the sense that this was. I don't know why, but I've got the sense that this is driven more by her desire to testify now rather than the committee wanting her to testify now.
So
I think she felt some need to get this out now.
Yeah. Look, and maybe Alex is right that she had said, I'm unwilling, my video testimony was sufficient.
Yeah.
But something changed. The committee called everybody back with 24 hours notice during a recess.
Yeah. Alex could be right, though, that maybe they wanted to get it in before she changed her mind.
She doesn't. Yeah. I mean, any of these, who knows?
Yeah,
but she doesn't strike me as someone who has lost, is going to lose her nerve.
Right. She seemed resolute.
Yeah. And look, let's just be clear here again. She's just describing what happened. She's not. Nothing in here was, I'm stretching. I'm trying to insinuate. She described what she said and saw and wrote.
And heard.
It's just
Yep.
what she heard and heard was utterly outrageous.
Yes.
Like somebody's got to go back and put the top hits together here. There were multiple times of
jaw droppers.
Jaw droppers. What Christy Adams said during our conversation was just a big old wowzer, right?
Yeah.
Wow, like this is this was shocking. Shocking. That Mark Meadows sought a pardon and didn't get one.
Didn't get it.
Michael Flynn sought a pardon, didn't get it, and is pleading the fifth.
Well, he was already pardoned once,
Yeah. I mean, do you remember this book back from the 1980s? This book called Twice Pardoned. It's a criminal convict was pardoned from his
Did you start
crime.
Gaslit?
Pardoned from his crime, but so he talked about that, but then also talked about how through the crucifixion of the Lord Jesus, he was pardoned twice pardoned.
Yeah. Speaking of which, have you
He
started
was a speaker
Gaslit?
back in the day.
Did you start Gaslit?
I did.
Yeah. Speaking of which.
Yeah. Speaking of which,
Twice pardoned.
Shelley Shelley, my wife, was like, I'm having a hard time following this. I don't know who any of these people are. Just a bit of a reminder. Shelley is very up to date. She pays attention to a lot. She's like, I don't know who John Dean is. I don't know who Mitchell is. I don't know who G. Gordon Liddy. No idea who that is.
Yep.
So that's something. And I'm like, seriously?
Yeah. There's
John
also
Dean's that guy that's on MSNBC sometimes talking about that. It's that guy, same guy.
Yeah.
All right.
Great bit of casting on John Dean's girlfriend, future wife. And I mean, this is history, so I'm not spoiling anything. Also, we watched a documentary about Martha Mitchell that was on Netflix. Because this is a thing that I've noticed happens now is when one streaming service has a hit show, another streaming service will find a documentary on the same topic and, try to draft off that momentum. And so we watched on Netflix a documentary about Martha Mitchell that was really fantastic and filled in some details. But yeah, Gaslit, highly recommended. And someday, our grandkids are going to be watching a show about the,
They sure will. And,
Trump hearings.
She is going to be a known figure in this world.
Yep. Co-host of The View.
I love it that that's the pinnacle in your mind of where someone like this would a 1 in 5 co-host on a morning television program, which is kind of the place that people go at the end of their careers to ride it out, right? They're
the token conservative on The View.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I guess
the
Meghan
McCain seat.
Look, in a lot of ways, she was whatever her politics are that allowed her to say that Jim Jordan gave a great speech. Whatever she was thinking she would work.
Mark Meadows said that Jim Jordan gave a great speech.
And said, what did you think? And she said, yeah.
Oh.
But whatever got her working for Mark Meadows in the first place, whatever had her wanting to see Donald Trump's presidency with accomplishments. Okay, all of that. She was poised. She's in her late 20s, poised to have had an extraordinary pedigree. So close to power at that stage of life. She was the one who needed to stop the president from going to the Capitol. She did. Think of that for a minute. She was the one that Mark Meadows is like, Cassidy, I thought we talked about this. He can't go. Stop him. What? Her job?
Yeah.
Why is it on her? Well, you're the chief of staff. Okay, so she's positioned to have done a lot of things in the political world, in the world around politics, in the corporate world that, is the soft side that moves around politics. That's all changed. She's now going to be this famous person because of this work, because she stepped up and told the truth. albeit not in, late January, early February of 2021 when there was an impeachment hearing going on right down the hallway, I think, from where this was happening. Because I'm telling you, had she said these things during impeachment, and just one other note on this kind of thing, Mitch McConnell had said, no, we're not going to support a special, investigation into this because, quote, we all were there. We know what happened. Remember that? Yeah. Did you know what was happening? Did you know the president tried to grab a Secret Service agent? Did you know that Mark Meadows wanted a pardon? Did you know that they knew about? You didn't know any of that. None
maybe
of it.
you did. Maybe you did, and you were hiding it too.
Oh, there we go.
Can we just take a moment to reflect on the fact that Benny Thompson, the chairman of the committee, ended these hearings by looking into the camera and saying, "Hey, all of you that are pretending you can't remember stuff, other people are talking. You probably ought to talk too."
You might want
That's
to.
what he
You
was
might
saying.
want to remember.
Yeah.
You might want to remember.
We
All
know
right.
stuff, folks.
Well, we won't be back with this now, I think, for 2 weeks, unless they call another special hearing inexplicably, and they really should be explaining now why they're going to need to. Because you don't want that to be the story, right? Get that out of our heads. Don't let any of us ask, why'd she wait? Why didn't you have her scheduled? Get it off the get the cream off the top here. So that's important. But they're now on a scheduled break for a couple of weeks before any of this comes back. And, this would have been great after summer break, next episode, too. The fact that they slid it in here. Something said, do this not 2 weeks from now, but do it now. I mean, I think they're looking for maybe a sweeps week boost. Was C-SPAN needing a, and the C-SPAN execs got to him and said, hey, we need you to run the Cassidy clips, because she was in previous episodes of this, right? Her little clips.
Yeah.
Well, she's the John Dean.
Amazing. This was an
You know what else I was
amazing
thinking?
episode.
She's the Monica Lewinsky. In some ways, she was the Monica Lewinsky of this. The young person who brings down the president.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see.
I mean, in this case, she wasn't participating in the same level of scandal. I don't know. See, a scandal of her own quality. Doesn't. But the way that Monica Lewinsky came out into the public view and got attached to Bill Clinton and the things she said that became the downfall and led to that impeachment. I am not putting aside yet that one of the remedies for Congress here is an impeachment before the end of this Congress.
That's an interesting idea. That would preclude him from being able to be elected president again.
It could be one of the punishments.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a double jeopardy thing though on impeachments. I don't know how that works. The fact that we're talking about that, should we 3 times impeach the guy? We should.
Fantastic.
All right. You done?
We're done. Wow.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks for hanging in there with us. It's good to be in. I mean, if I had to just sit up in my family room watching this by myself, it'd be miserable. I love my family room, but I'd be just texting and yelling. So, All right. Thanks. Tell your friends about it, and subscribe if you haven't already.
Smash that subscribe button.
Talk to you in a bit. Bye.